Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, people of the internet, welcome to another episode of Whisky Roundtable. It has been another huge week of whisky, as it always is. There's never a dull week of whisky, obviously punctuated from the fact that Alex had a party on the weekend. Australia is collectively still trying to get over that hangover 4 days later. But after a week back, we energized. We returned.
Well, our Fireball ambassador is still down, you know.
Our Fireball ambassador is still down, but the rest of us are energized. We're ready to talk about
good
blokes and everything in between about the whisky scene as it is. We are down one Matt Bailey tonight because we did.
I don't know what he's doing. We broke him.
We broke him. He's broken. He's in pieces on the ground somewhere, looking around for little biscuits at 3 a.m. in dark of weird clubs. We don't know where he is, but that's all right. But we have some of the regular gang here tonight. Andy Milne, relatively good bloke. Whisky culture, Alex Dahlenburg, relatively good lass. Scotty Fitzsimons, okay bloke. But most importantly, Fred Siggins, fresh out of the Sullivans Cove distillery, genuinely a good bloke. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Fred. What's in your glass tonight as we pull this train away from the station?
Well, kick it off, Milne. What are you drinking?
I'm drinking off-brand Glengarry from Boutique Whisky Company.
Good one.
One of my favourite distilleries that you don't really see much of their stuff. So it seemed like a very wise opportunity to try their juice.
Very cool. Well, I actually haven't decided what I'm drinking from my collection tonight.
Okay, we've seen a few backgrounds from you, but where are we now? This looks a little bit new. Where does this one come from, Alex?
This is the hopefully final setup. This is my bar. There's a full mahogany bar at the front of me here, and I'm sitting behind the bar. This is my home setup that I've had in storage for 5 years, I think it is now, and finally got all of my whiskey collection together, as well as another one over there. So my whiskey is finally home and it's finally with me, and I have my beautiful bar, which Matt Bailey sat himself behind the whole Saturday night and pretty much poured everyone my whiskey. So I haven't decided what I'm drinking yet because I'm kind of spoilt for choice at the moment. But what's open right now is a Westwood Stout cask.
Excellent. Fred. What do you got?
It's one of the first really genuinely warm evenings here in Melbourne, so I'm currently on a glass of rosé. But I think once that's done, I've got this Alec and Mallet bottling of Glenmoray 11-year-old, which was
nice.
aged in a Manzanilla cask, which is really pretty rare. Obviously, you're looking at Oloroso or PX and stuff like that. But I love my dry cherries, and so when I saw a single malt Scotch that was aged in a Manzanilla cask, I jumped on it.
It's surprising. It's really hard to source that cask, but it's surprisingly delicious whiskey. There's the few that I've ever had. I think Glenfarclas did a really good one. I think it was one of the sort of crazy releases. It's super tasty stuff.
Yeah, I think the closest totally thing I had, apart from that was I think it was a distiller's reserve of Glenkinchie that's done in an Amontillado cask. But yeah, Manzanilla, this may be one of the others I've ever come across, I think.
Very cool. All right, let's kick tonight off. Who the hell are you, Fred?
Me?
Oh, sorry.
Scotty. We've got about that guy.
Scotty.
You know.
Do I get to go? Or what's going on?
It's just good people only, not okay people.
I'm just too excited to talk to Fred, but go for it. 85,
and if I manage to finish all of this in the next half an hour, I've got one left of these little babies, which is DC 100. Which is but we'll see how we go.
Very good.
All right, so who the hell are you, Fred?
I'm a guy who drinks too much whiskey and occasionally gets paid for it, which is really lucky.
Collectively, you're in the right spot.
Yeah, I think
tell us your problems.
I think I'm in good company with that one. I am the outgoing brand manager of Sullivans Cove Distillery. So I've been at Sullivans Cove for 4 years and have just recently resigned in the last couple of weeks. So now I'm a man of leisure.
Ooh, wonderful. Now, no one at home would really know what Sullivans Cove is, right?
I mean, I guess it depends on how much attention they're paying to Australian whiskey.
I think Sullivans Cove is probably the one that kicked Australian whiskey off put us on the world whiskey map, and kind of brought a lot of attention to Australia. Would I be wrong in saying that?
No, look, I think that's a pretty fair assessment. Certainly, if you consider the fact that there were probably less than 10 distilleries in Australia making whiskey in 2014 when we won our World's Best Single Malt at the World's Whiskies Awards. And now there are, I don't know, you guys tell me, hundreds?
By the time you finish that sentence, another 3 had opened. So,
I mean, I know that like just in Tasmania alone, we're now close to 50 distilleries that are producing whiskey. Obviously, not all of that is in the bottle yet, but there's probably at least 20 distilleries that have already got liquid in a bottle and all that kind of stuff. So I think that Sullivans Cove certainly one of the founding distilleries in the Australian craft whiskey movement, the second one to get a license after Lark Distillery. But yeah, I think that what Sullivans Cove winning that award in 2014 proved was that, Australian whiskey could be more than just a cottage industry, and that it could actually, be something that was a viable business model and something that people would be interested in and would pay money for. And so, yeah, we've just seen a massive amount of investment and interest in Australian whiskey since then. So, yeah.
Awesome. I want to dig deep on this, but I want to, and one of the great things about the round table is we have so many different views and opinions and experiences. 2014, we were all living in Australia. Apart from Milne, you were in the UK.
Not this guy.
Yeah. So what was, we know how we felt when Australian whiskey got up. How was it received globally, particularly in the UK when Sullivans Cove won Best Whiskey? And what did it mean? Did it change your perception of what Australian whiskey is?
I think it definitely put it on the map. It's without being harsh, there's a lot of world awards of various different countries, and South Africa is quite often Baines, so Three Ships was always a winner of that as well, and things, and so there was always these sort of countries that are outside of the norm in terms of what was emerging at the time. And even at this point, Japanese whiskey was still a pretty hard slog. It wasn't an easy sell at that point either. But I think it definitely made people sort of go, "Oh, what's this?" And I think when you've got brands that you've heard of and you kind of know of that have emerged over many years and they win an award, you're kind of like, okay, yeah, you're that one distillery that's doing the great work of that country. But I think people didn't really realize that Australia was making whiskey, let alone that it was winning awards. So it definitely, there was a head turning moment of like, ah, shit, Australia makes whiskey. Like, that's cool. And the downside to it was there was no liquid in the country. So there was, I vividly remember the only things.
That was 2014, or are you talking about now? Because it's the same thing now, right?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a few more. So I think Archie Rose is Australian spirit, let alone Australian whiskey. Archie Rose, Manly Spirits, Starwood, occasionally Helios Road, and even Bakery Hill.
Four Pillars.
Bakery Hill was one of the Four Pillars, of course. Yeah, and Bakery Hill was probably the first one that I remember seeing on the shelf in 500ml at a very high price point, because it's made it all the way across there. And so it was this sort of real barrier to entry to Australian whiskey. I think it's the downside of winning great awards is actually if the product's still not there and accessible to the country, to the customer, it makes it much harder. And at least if there's a wider range, it's easier. But for us, it was a case of, okay. I think we realised that Australia was making whiskey, but we didn't know that there was anything that we could actually go out and purchase because there was so little to get.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, and I think it's been one of the biggest challenges of my job over the last 4 years is trying to get people excited about Sullivans Cove while having very, very little liquid to actually put in front of people, especially internationally. I think that it can be a little bit easy when you win an award like that. It can be pretty easy to sort of drink a little bit of your own Kool-Aid. And get pretty excited about. I mean, and don't get me wrong, it's an amazing achievement for such a tiny distillery, but realizing that, internationally, so many people have never heard of Sullivans Cove, and certainly not had the opportunity to taste Sullivans Cove and really kind of understand what all that is about.
Yeah, it's like there's so much I want to ask about, like being at the helm of this brand, and I think it's exactly right in terms of, you know, even in Australia after that award was won, not only Andy, people in the UK, people in Australia realised we made whiskey as well, and then having an Australian whiskey on the shelf of any type was near impossible for that period. You know, Fred, we've been lucky enough, you know, the people in this roundtable, we were drinking Sullivans Cove before, or at least the ones in Australia were before it was rare as hen's teeth. Like, how do you manage a brand that people have potentially heard of and know the myth of, but can't get access to? And so, like, how do you can only one bottle only goes so far. How do you manage that? You know, keeping the brand alive and keeping people interested.
I suppose there are three kind of main approaches that I took to it. The first one was about trying to tell the story to people and really sort of take the brand outside of the distillery in terms of social media and events and, you know, a website that is full of great information and all that kind of stuff, so that even if people don't have an opportunity to interact with the liquid, they can still interact with the brand in a way that makes sense. And I suppose, you know, I took my cues as far as that goes from some other sort of very well-regarded brands in the world. Like, there might be a certain kind of car or motorcycle that you've had your eye on since you were 6 years old. You may never have driven one or may never have even seen one, but you still know, like, that BMW touring bike, that's the one I want when I'm going to, you know, when I'm wealthy and I'm going to do my tour around the world. So that was one approach. Another approach was obviously doing tastings, like stuff that we did with you, Scotty, and the stuff that we've run ourselves from the distillery, and with so many other great bars and bottle shops around the country, both in person, sort of pre-COVID, and then all the online stuff that's been happening with that. That was definitely one of the ways that we sort of went about it, you know, sending out little sample bottles like the one you've got, Alex, and trying to spread that small amount of liquid around and put it in front of people in an environment where they could really get into it and really understand why Sullivans Cove is special. And then I guess the third way is, you know, connecting with the industry, you know, making sure that there's a bottle of Sullivans Cove on the back bar at all of the best whiskey bars in Australia and increasingly around the world, so that, you know, if somebody doesn't necessarily want to drop the money or can't get hold of a full bottle of Sullivans, at least they can walk into their favorite whiskey bar and try a nip of it.
Yes. Well, that's if we had it.
Yeah.
And so, like, there's some exciting developments in the world of Sullivans Cove. That's a little bit more of an slant that on the mainland there is a new distributor who excels to bars. I think we'll see a lot of Sullivans behind bars in the very near future. But I mean, like, that's been the defining factor for a lot of people about Sullivans. Particularly people getting into whiskey in the past 5 years, it's where do I get it? And there's been like investment and you know, very slight ownership changes and that sort of thing. But the production capacity hasn't changed at all, has it, in terms of how much booze is actually being produced?
Well, the capacity hasn't changed, but how much booze is being produced has changed. And I think that one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is that before 2014, Sullivans Cove was really like struggling to make ends meet because Australian whiskey wasn't popular, and we did still have to charge a reasonable amount per bottle because we were producing such a tiny amount. And so we actually didn't have the staff or the money to be able to run the stills all the time. Sorry, the still, I should say, because it's just one.
We'll talk about that in a minute.
Yeah. So it was really what happened in 2014 is we just put on more crew and started running the still more often. So now we're at full capacity, which is probably about, you know, 4 times as much as what was being produced pre-2014. But, you know, the thing with Sullivans is that we age our whiskey for a really, really long time. So even the slight increase that sort of, you know, went from 2014 to 2017 on kind of increasing little by little, that stuff is still, you know, at least 3 or 4 years away from coming online.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, those shortages are not really going anywhere anytime soon. There will be an increase at some point in the future. But again, we also didn't want to do what we've seen a lot of other companies do, which is to maybe get a little bit too excited and build massive new distilleries and put in 17 new stills and all that kind of stuff. And we really just wanted to keep track of the sort of hands-on nature of the product and keep making it the way that we had, because we figured that's why we were winning awards in the first place.
Yeah, wow. And how long have you been with Sullivans?
4 years. So I started.
4 years.
I started early 2017.
Okay.
I was actually I was there as a consultant for about 6 months before that too.
Okay.
Is there anything like definitively that you've seen change in Sullivans in those 4 years, in the way they approach things or the way they do things?
I think that the biggest change has probably been in the way that we put together the double cask, because that's the only vatted expression that Sullivans produces. With the single cask stuff, you taste a sample, you decide it's tasty, you put it in a bottle, right? There's not really that much you can do to it. Obviously, cask selection is really important, but the way that cask selection was happening when I started with Sullivans is pretty much the same way that it is now. The samples go to the tasting panel, and when we find something that we think is really good, we put it in a bottle. But Heather, who's the current head distiller at Sullivans, has put a huge amount of work into the double cask batches. We've increased the ABV, and just the blending trials and the amount of effort that she puts into the blending trials now is pretty outstanding. And rather than sort of saying, okay, the formula for double cask is basically 3 or 4 casks of American oak plus 1 cask of French oak, and that's the batch, and away she goes. Now Heather might take 5 liters from here, 10 liters from there, 20 liters from there, 30 liters from there. And she's incorporating a lot more interesting different cask styles as well. Almost every batch of double cask now has got some French oak white wine blended in. A lot of them have got American oak refill casks, which, were sort of virgin oak casks that we then refilled. American oak ex-Tawny casks, all sorts of fun stuff that she sort of uses like a bit of a spice rack. And I just think that product is a lot better now than it was probably when I started.
Yeah, wow. I did some work for Gourmet Traveller Wine Magazine, putting together their single malt whiskey guide, and you guys were part of it. I'm not sure whether you were there at that stage, but that was right when you changed the ABV.
Yeah,
I believe. What was the reasoning behind that? Because that was, I thought it was brilliant. You don't see many companies just go up. Like last time I saw it happen was with VB when they went back to 5% after people carrying on that VB. That they dropped it down to, I think it was 4.4. But you guys taking it up, that was pretty cool. And there was a big difference in that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, again, the funny thing about, working for a company like Sullivans Cove is that Sullivans has been around for 26 years. And you think that like people really only started getting interested in Australian whiskey maybe within the last 5 or 6 years. So that first 20 years was very, very different. Everyone was sort of like, why would we bother drinking whiskey from Tasmania when there's perfectly good stuff coming from Scotland? And it's like you were saying, Andy, like 6 years ago, you couldn't even get people to drink Japanese whiskey, let alone something that was produced here in Australia. So the initial thinking behind double cask was that it was the entry-level Australian whiskey. It was something that was going to be light and approachable. And talking to Patrick, the former head distiller, about it was really interesting, because he was like, we were trying to get people to just try Australian whiskey full stop. So he was actually going after Johnny Walker drinkers and Jim Beam drinkers and Jameson drinkers. And he was like, he mentions Jameson a lot in terms of how he was originally, and then we sort of skip forward by 10 years and everything is sort of, at that point, the price point for double cask was 160 odd bucks a bottle, and it, selling out constantly and very, very high demand. And so I sort of looked at it and along with the rest of the crew sort of said, okay, look, this is not an entry-level whiskey anymore. This is a whiskey that's now being appreciated by connoisseurs or, by Australian whiskey enthusiasts. It's not just going to be something that you wander into the bottle shop and pick up out of curiosity. So, personally as a whiskey drinker, 40% is a bit light on for me. So I was like, I would like to see this at a little bit higher of an ABV. let's do some trials and see how it tastes. And basically everyone just agreed that it tasted better that way. So that's what we started with.
What was the final ABV? 40.
Right now it's standardized at 45 from batch to batch, but they are about to actually change it again. And from about sort of March of next year, it's going to basically be variable ABV the same way that the single casks are. So from now on, Heather's just going to do ABV trials on every batch and bottle it just where she reckons it tastes the best. And it's awesome. Anywhere from 45 to 55 is going to be the band that it'll sit in.
Big fan of Heather. Big fangirl.
Honestly, one of the best people I've ever worked with.
And one of Australia's best distillers.
Absolutely.
And you like distillers don't always get the glory because they, are not always the brand ambassador. And, they're very good at distilling, so they tend to be needed to be at distilleries distilling that. But
distillers are my heroes.
Yeah.
Fred, we'd love to have her on if you could hook that up.
Yeah, sure. I'll send her.
I'd just fangirl and get super geeky and holy hell.
Mate, I'll send her.
We can just mute ourselves for that one.
Yeah. So just a quick story that sort of sums up a little bit what Fred was saying. I remember there was the 2013 or 2014 Sydney Whisky Fair here at the Oak Barrel, and I wasn't working for the Oak Barrel. I was here as a hunter.
I'm just going to get a beer.
I remember there was an Australian section. Patrick from Sullivans, Bill Larty from Overeem, David from Bakery Hill, and Cameron Syme, from Lime Burners, all sitting in this section of the fair. You pay $250 for a ticket to that event these days. And people have already walked in. They've got their glass. All the drams are free from here on in. They could not get people to go over there and taste the whiskey. And I just remember that. And then a couple of years later, they're the ones that got hammered the hardest. So just like a seismic shift basically overnight. But Crafty Field, a quick g'day to Crafty. I know he's out in Kapiti tonight in the middle of brew runs and that sort of thing. Bit of a question because, and this is, he is a distiller who's gone from picking single casks into now starting to create acid and blending different casks together. Might be a little bit of a question for Heather if we get her on. But Fred, do you have any advice of, when people are starting to approach that blending, batting area to sort of bring this? Is there anything like that people should look for? Any tips or tricks of what makes a good bat?
I think that the most important thing with a vatted expression is that you need to start with a good base. It doesn't have to be the most interesting whiskey in the world, but it has to be delicious and drinkable and easy and pretty soft. I remember when I used to work for Diageo as a Diageo Bar Academy trainer, we had one of the sessions that we did where we would basically take blending kits into bars and get people to make their own to make their own blended whiskey, basically with a base of sort of grain whiskey and then a bunch of different single malts that they could mix in. And the biggest mistake that people made is that they put too much smoky stuff in. Like just a tiny amount of that is going to absolutely blow out the rest of the flavor of anything else. So I think that we, sort of take a pretty similar approach to making a vatted expression. Most of the volume is American oak ex-bourbon and just pretty soft and gentle and enjoyable, and maybe not the most interesting whiskey in the world, but just, good, lots of texture, lots of malt character, lots of nice fruit and oak character to it. And then that's when Heather will go and get all those other bits and pieces, the really interesting wine casks and the fortified casks and the European oak casks and the virgin casks and all that kind of stuff, and just start dripping them in bit by bit. So it's almost like if you are, if you're making a curry, the majority of the volume of it's just going to be like chicken and coconut cream. You know what I mean? Just a solid base, and then you're dosing little bits of spice in there to try to create something that's balanced. I'm sure Heather would have much more insight than me because she's actually the one that does it, and I'm just the one that gets to reap the benefits and drink it at the end of when she's done. But that's kind of my understanding of her process, and I think that. Given those exercises that I've done, it sort of holds true where you just want to start with something nice and soft and then flavor it up from there.
Yeah. It's interesting because you sort of listed off a huge variety of casks there to use. And it's quite rare for most distilleries to sort of go, oh yeah, we mature in this, and this. most distilleries we're predominantly ex-bourbon. Most of the brands I work with are 80% one type and 20% another, and that's kind of the bulk. And they use the 90, the 20%, 10% as their spice level. It's really interesting to see that sort of really broad scope of sort of flavor character from very variable set of casks. But what's the core of Sullivans Cove that's sort of your classic bread and butter for cask maturation, and how much we talk about you peak, you only need 2% and it's overpowering. So of that sort of spice, how much were you kind of really playing with in that character?
Yeah, well, I mean, you're absolutely right. The same is true at Sullivans Cove. The vast majority of what there is in the warehouse is American oak ex-bourbon, just standard, and then the other sort of primary cask style that we use is European oak ex-tawny, so Australian port style fortified, and then those other weird casks that are out there, they are kind of like the spice rack. So I couldn't tell you exact percentages of what there is out there, but it wouldn't be much. And those are the ones that Heather might be using only just a few liters at a time.
Yeah.
But yeah, American ex-bourbon is really the core of Sullivans Cove.
And do you because my experience with Sullivans Cove is actually very, very limited, but with those sort of unusual casks or slightly more different casks, were you ever thinking of releasing those as single casks, or were they always kind of designed as they're here for spice?
No, I mean, one of the really fun things that I've got to do over the last 4 years is basically figure out how to bottle and sell the experiments that Patrick was laying down 10 years ago, because he was doing a lot of experimentation at the time in that sort of kind of, early 2010s, late 2000s. He was doing a lot of interesting experiments, like using virgin casks that had been used to mature a previous batch of Sullivans Cove. He was then recharring them and filling them up again. There was a bit of a shortage of European oak tawny casks at the time, so he was getting quite a lot of American oak ex-tawny casks, and he was filling up some white wine and some muscat. So there's a couple of different ways that we've released those over the last few years. Some of them we have done as single casks, and we've got a whole sort of let me see if I've got one. Yeah, like what Scott's got, we've got these sort of stripe label series, which we call the kind of the cask variations. So this one's an American oak ex-tawny. Scott's got an American oak refill. There's a French oak ex-white wine, which is blue with a green stripe through it. So just figuring out fun ways to talk about those whiskies and do them as special release single casks. With some of the really, really cool ones, we've done them in a green label that we call special cask, which we basically use as an in-house independent bottling, just for those unique one-off sort of never to be repeated cask styles, which has been really good fun. And then there is also a distillery only experimental label, which we call pilot cask, as in like a pilot episode of a TV show. And that's not really something that has been promoted outside of the distillery, just because those are the casks that are a little bit funky and left field and not really within sort of standard Sullivans Cove style. So we only hand sell them at the distillery.
It's a really good point. There's a lot of things that make Sullivans Cove very special for me. And the first one is obviously the stuff in the bottle, but all the other stuff around it, I think, helps build what the distillery is. And in Australia, with our climate, whiskies can be ready in 2, 3, 4 years. But Sullivans still has that element that you see in a lot of the ideas you have today, you may not see for 10, 15, 20 years. Whereas with its younger, you almost see them to fruition, because, people tend to stay at distilleries for 5 years, but not everyone stays at the distillery for 10, 15 years. So, I mean, how challenging is that for you and the team working there now, going, this is someone else's baby idea. They may not be working here anymore. We now have to take what they created and mold it into something that we think is excellent.
Well, I mean, obviously that's a massive responsibility to take on when you're like, yep, cool, world's best single malt. Okay, let's do this, And I think that, certainly both Heather and myself and a lot of the other younger people on the crew have felt that pressure. And at the same time, we're so lucky because we had 26 years of Patrick's knowledge to draw down on. he's done a lot of experiments. Some of them worked, some of them didn't. You know, by the time that we got there, it was sort of 2 full generations or 3 full generations of Sullivans Cove whiskey that had been matured and bottled, you know, 10 years at a time, a lot of them. So you can really start to see at that point what's working and what's not. So, for example, the very first French oak white wine cask that we bottled back in 2017 was a 300-litre ex-Chardonnay cask. We were just like, this is absolutely brilliant. So at that point, we laid down some more Chardonnay casks because we knew that had worked really well. And so, you know, 10 years from now, you'll see some more of that coming out. That's the one. Yeah, TD202.
Just a concept flavor.
Like that. Yeah. That's all stuff that's been opened at tastings throughout the years here at the Oak Barrel, and they're all empty. But every now and again, someone notices that I leave just a little bit in some special ones, and people, if they're really excited about it, they might get a nip. So if you come by, I mean, it's been here for a little while now. I don't know what it tastes like. It's be lots of oxygen there, but there is a tiny little bit of that.
I'm closer than you are.
I'm pretty sure that I drive a lot quicker than you, Miss Daisy.
They don't drive, so that's fine.
There we go.
There it is. And yeah, you know, a lot of those American oak X20 casks, like I said, those were sort of a matter of necessity rather than being a deliberate choice at that point in time, I think. But they've been super popular. They've been really well received. And so now when we see those American oak 20 casks pop up, we're happy to take them and happy to fill them up again. So yeah, it's fun that we've got that kind of really, 26-year back catalogue of casks to taste through and know, you know, what's working and what's not.
Okay.
Yeah, you're probably one of the few that has that sort of back. And you see it in the wine industry in Australia as well. It's the amount of experimenting with different grape varieties in different areas, different regions. I think, you know, most of the country's kind of settled on what they think is right. And I think the joy of McLaren Vale and the hills is there still very much kind of like, let's try this and let's try this and let's try this. And there's great joy in that, but there's also great joy in going, we know what works. This is good, this isn't, this is, and there's that base of expertise is very limited, I suspect, in this industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, there's obviously still plenty of experiments going on at Sullivans, which we have no idea how they will turn out because it's not 10 years from now, so we won't know for a while. But yeah, it's good that like for every year that you go along, you can say, okay, here are these experiments that did work out, so we know that we can sort of scale that up, and the results are going to be pretty good down the track.
Because you're sorry, go Scotty.
You go, Alex.
Because you're outgoing.
Yes.
What's your favorite Sullivans
as a person, or like
No, outgoing as a brand manager. You have to be a brand manager. What is your favorite expression of Sullivans Cove you've ever had?
I mean, honestly, that TD202, the very first.
That is it.
That in my mind is. It was just so different than anything I'd ever tried before. Obviously, like Sullivans Cove in general is pretty different than anything I've ever tried before, but that one was just next level. It was a 300-litre cask, and it was 9 years old, which is relatively young for us, and especially for a 300-litre, that's relatively young. So it was super, super light and floral. Really perfumed, really beautiful, really delicate, which is not really something that I think most people would associate with Australian single malts. An outstanding whiskey, and I think that the white wine cask stuff that we've put out has been pretty outstanding. But generally speaking, just sort of standard Sullivans Cove American oak single cask. That the stuff that's been put out in the last few years, real tropical, fruity, and malty, and Maltesers and chocolate and all that kind of stuff. I'm pretty happy with that.
All right, and what do you drink off-brand?
Off-brand, everything.
Off-brand.
Everything I can get my hands on. I get
Come on, like Scotty's got JMO, I've got Jack. I'm still pushing for sponsorship, by the way. Andy's got his Fireball.
Yeah. Okay.
What's yours? What have you got?
I don't know. What's the go-to? I mean, as far as like a guilty pleasure, you mean, or just what's always on the shelf?
Yeah. Well, okay. So say you're at my house on Saturday night. We're all walking around with bottles. What's that bottle in your hand?
I don't know, Mr. Black. That's what always comes out when we start doing shots at my house. You know what I mean? Like,
wow.
Yeah, love it. Love a good high quality coffee liqueur, locally made, delicious.
I have the Panama Geisha that was given to me.
How good is it? How good's the packaging on the
I haven't even opened it. It was given to me like 5-6 years ago, and I haven't opened it.
Yeah. There you go.
How good's the Amaro?
Okay.
I mean, yeah. As far as whiskey goes, we're always on the Springbank train around here.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Aaron, like some of the cask sort of variation stuff that Aaron has done over the last couple of years, was good, just like, you know, $100-$120 a bottle, just really good everyday drinking whiskeys.
Yeah, Aaron's just going strength to strength.
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
it is. I agree. I agree.
Fred, like we're talking a lot about at Sullivans Cove, and 2 weeks ago you did announce that you were leaving that position. You've done excellent work with that brand over the last 4 years, but you've also done excellent stuff before that. You're going to do excellent stuff in the future. But in this industry, we are always defined by our jobs, which is fair enough. But I mean, there must be, like, for you personally, is it a feeling of sadness or relief or a mixture of all of the above, or pride of what you've been able to build the brand? Like, how are you feeling right now? Now that the news, it's not a decision you make lightly, but now it's out of there in the public domain. Like, how do you feel about it?
I mean, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. There's obviously, pretty complex emotions when you've sort of dedicated 4 years of your professional life to something and seen it grow so much and seen it change so much. There's absolutely a sense of sadness to be kind of giving up what has really been a dream job in so many ways. And also a sense of relief, because it's definitely been a pretty hectic 4 years, and I've had all sorts of stuff thrown at me that I never really expected. It's a small team, and so it's the kind of place where you just get stuck in when something needs to get done. I never expected to be doing software design or managing a logistics team, but those are just some of the things that I've done over the last 4 years. So yeah, a sense of relief about that, certainly, and yeah, a huge amount of pride just in terms of everything that we've managed to do over the last 4 years, and everything that Heather's done on the production side, and the crew that I've built over the years. It's definitely a bigger crew than it was when I started, and people like Ali, who is now running the cellar door down in Tassie and is sort of becoming a bit of a brand ambassador for Sullivans Cove as well. She's awesome. Sam Cumming, who's the sales manager, who we hired a little over a year ago, has really just sort of come into his own in his role. Like I said, Heather's just absolutely slaying it, and the production manager, Kirsten, is an amazing backup for Heather as well. So yeah, just everything that everyone's doing is pretty cool, and I suppose that's part of the impetus for me, is that I feel like I got Sullivans Cove from where it was to where it is now, and really ticked a lot of the boxes that I set as priorities when I first started. And so I think that, yeah, for me, it's a good time to step back, because I do feel like I've sort of achieved the things that I set out to achieve there.
Yeah. Are there any hints into what's coming up for Fred Siggins? Or I mean, your partner works at one of Melbourne's best bars, from memory. Yeah, she runs the rooftop bar at Bomba. Yeah, so is there a correlation between bars in Melbourne reopening and you all of a sudden resigning? Is that what's going on here?
Well, the timing's good in terms of the fact that I can leave my house now. So I think that I would probably be pretty bored if I had resigned and then just had to continue sitting around my house twiddling my thumbs. So it's nice that I can go out and see people again. But no, there's no, well, actually, no, I shouldn't say that, because I'm doing a couple of shifts a week just down at my local pub, just to have a chance to pour some pints and say hi to people again, which I've really missed doing. But yeah, no, there's no immediate plans to go and open a bar with Cara or anyone else right now.
It's excellent. It's I think we in Australia, we've spoken about a lot with various distillers about this, about there not being that generational knowledge like there are in some other countries where people come up through, learn off other people and change over. Having knowledge like yours out there, and now someone else will move into that role, we're starting to get that element. I think it's just as important from a management, ambassadorial, sales side. Jesse Morgan's asked, so what's on the horizon? Brie Atwood has a job opportunity for you from the Backwoods Distillery. How are you good with baking?
Look, I'm not really a morning person, so I think that's...
It's all right because you stay up overnight to bake the bread. So if you just do
there you go. I can do that as long as I can
leave them to
the whiskeys. Yeah, I'm actually not a bad baker, to be honest.
Says everyone in Melbourne during lockdown.
Yeah, exactly. Something to keep ourselves interested, didn't we?
Yeah. I got drunk. Everyone else just baked bread.
Trust me, I did.
We're in the UK. There's this weird coming over here. There are sandwich shops in every street, and you can buy a sandwich, and there's sort of chain sandwich shops and everything. Like picking up lunch and a quick sandwich is the easiest thing in the UK, and it's really hard to pick up a sandwich. I can get banh mi, and I can get pho, and I can get pad thai, but I can't just get a club sandwich.
Where are the sandwiches? Where are the sandwiches?
Deal with it. But the amount of stuff that we put in our bread in the UK, there's so many preservatives that bread lasts for 2 weeks, and no one questions this. And I do wonder the amount of people in the UK that have decided to get on the sourdough chain and make all this sourdough and then get really confused by the fact that their bread is moldy within 2 days of baking it. It's just like, well, this is what happens with real bread.
The one thing that pisses me off about that, Milne, is sometimes all I want is two sangers on with some onion on bread, sort of like Bunnings style. There is not one place in Sydney that does a sausage sandwich regularly.
Well, you're not allowed to put the onions on anymore because Bunnings have banned it.
Yeah, but like
no. Like I got the other day.
Did we appeal that? I can't remember.
Because I don't want to get any Bunnings in trouble because this is, groundbreaking news. My partner went up to Bunnings the other day, and I'm like, if you get a sausage sandwich without me, like, you just don't come home. So he brought home 2 sausages and sandwich, and the onions were on top.
There you go.
Interesting.
There you go. Yeah. I think it's just like post-COVID. Fuck you, it's going on top. It's not going underneath. There you go.
Andy, I feel like, seeing as that I'm not currently employed, I feel like we're developing a business model here. We're going to do like sausage sandwich / just standard sandwich store. Is that going to be our next business?
I mean, sign me up. How much do you need? 100K? That's how much. Yeah. I haven't got it, but we can.
I know how much all those ingredients cost. I know how much all those ingredients cost. If you could provide me within walking distance of the Oak Barrel, I will pay $10 every day for lunch for one of them. That is a serious markup.
I reckon you're in the right spot for a $10 snack.
I'll just get a little trolley and park it outside the Oak Barrel.
Mate, we've been wondering how to get foot traffic back. This is it.
Good.
That waft throughout Sydney, that aroma.
And the food on the trolley has died. So the idea of just going office to office with a trolley and like, I've got your sausages. Do you want them? I reckon we can do this.
Easy. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Sausage on Bread Roundtable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Snag table.
Snag table. I want to ask one last question, serious question, before we even go into more bullshit. Talk to me about the stills at Sullivans because they're quite unique, or the still.
Yeah. So Sullivans has only one still. Both wash and spirit run go through the same still. So an entire production cycle for us is 1 week, and there's about 5 or 6 casks that get filled up every week from that entire production cycle because we do a couple of wash runs and then a couple of spirit runs once the still's been cleaned out. 2,500 liters, and it's actually based on the design of a brandy still. It was built in Tasmania, up in the north. But yeah, and it's exactly the same piece of kit that Sullivans has been using since it first fired it up in 1994. Obviously, bits of it have been replaced over the years, but the basic shape and size and function. And yeah, it's really interesting. It's got a hand-beaten copper onion on top of the boiler, which obviously causes a fair amount of reflux. And it's got a big, tall gooseneck, pretty much like a parallel line arm, and then also a worm tub condenser, which is very rare in Australian single malt. There's only one other distillery that I know for sure uses a worm tub. There might be other ones out there that I'm not aware of. But yeah, so really, really interesting style of spirit that comes off of that.
You saying that you're more like a brandy still than a whiskey still. So what kind of difference is there between the two?
That's a great idea.
Well, with a
Sorry, we've lost Alex, but continue.
Sorry, no, I'm listening. I am, but that's a fucking brilliant idea.
Yeah, we've kept it together, but no, she's all snagged.
No, you're kidding me. Like, still's my favorite part. Go for it.
I'm not enough of an expert on the still shapes to be able to tell you exactly what the difference is, but I think that the big thing is that we're getting more reflux straight off the boiler than you would from a standard whiskey still. You see, like, most whiskey stills have got much bigger pipes that come straight off the boiler without that really small gauge on top of the onion. Obviously, some whiskey stills do still have a bit of a bulb, but this is like a really sort of like a full tall onion. And then obviously the worm tub means that we get a reasonable amount of sulfur left in the final distillate, which just gives you like a bigger, meatier, more rustic style of new make that really lends itself well to long-term maturation. And I think that's one of the big points of difference with Sullivans is that if you're going to produce a whiskey that you're planning on bottling sort of 2, 3, 4 years later, it's actually got to be pretty clean coming off the still because, where there's plenty of time in the Australian climate to get lots of nice oak influence in it, it's not really enough time to sort of clean up a spirit. But if you've got something like Sullivan's New Make, which is pretty big and dense and full on, more like, Mortlock or Craigellachie or something that you'd see coming off of Isla, it needs a long time in the cask to really soften up. But once it does, it's really cool.
Yeah, just a question just on this, and this can go to anyone because obviously that still was bought a little while ago, but Jesse Morgan is watching on the YouTube in that weird place that is the YouTube's comment section. But like, if you're getting a still made in Australia, does anyone have any insight into what like the physical costs? I know there's a long wait time for a lot of the more established still producers, but just throwing that one out if anyone's got any ideas on that.
I don't really. That's as we used to say in the restaurant. That's not my section, chef. Thanks for that. I don't have to.
I'd love to see someone say that in my restaurant.
I'm now going in and telling all of your staff. It's like any question you don't have the answer, just say. Like, she completely respects it. She respects that response. Don't worry.
Yeah.
To be honest.
Jesse, in response to that, I'm honestly not sure. It depends on what you're making and you're getting it made. But I've seen figures anywhere from 30 or 40 grand at the very base level up to 100, 150, 200 and into the future. It
depends who's making it as well. Because the most the name completely escapes me at the moment, but the sort of the famous still maker in Scotland is there's a 18-month 36-month waiting list just to start making it in the first place. So to get it from the top people, as it were, you have to wait 3-4 years before they even decide that they'll make it for you. It's crazy.
And that can often be the more important deciding factor rather than if it's going to be 50 grand or 100 grand is what do I do for the other 4 years? But I think we've seen a like proliferation, and the Aisling distillery was mentioned just before I was through with the worm tub. Mark Burns and the team out there, they make stills for a lot of distilleries. Obviously, if you want Peter Bailey at Nat Bluer down in Tassie to make you a still, you're going to be waiting a few years for that to come to fruition. So it really depends. And as Crafty points out, X amount will get you a still. Then all the bits and pieces that you want to go with it, that will go up as well.
I like the idea of a still with the add-ons. It's like, you know, it's like the sort of extra section you get when you order food. It's like, do you want cheese with that? And do you want a bit of, you know, bacon?
It's like me pricing up a car. Like I sit there and go, oh yeah, I can afford that car. And the next thing you know, like I'm going through like a million different add-ons, and all of a sudden I've got a walk-and-shore kit, and I'm like, yeah, no, I can't afford that car. Sorry, goodbye.
Yeah.
Well, I can imagine that's what it's like.
No one puts power windows on the stills. They just leave them closed because that'd be another $50 I'd have to pay as an add-on. So don't need it.
Look, you can't overstate the importance of cup holders. You might not think it's a big
Stills with cup holders. Oh my God.
That is an unbelievable idea.
The first time I ever sat in a room with my parents buying a car, I had the first dunce moment that I remember being like, oh, you're an idiot. And they were going through all the additions, and it was something about the paint finish. And it's like, oh, we can make it metallic if you want. Like, and that's just an extra $7.50. And my head, $7.50 is £7.50. And my mum was just like, oh, no, we don't need that. It's like, it's £7.50. It's like, what do you mean? It's just like, it's a bargain. Like, why wouldn't you do this? She's like, no, it's not. And I was like, oh, okay, right, I'll shut up.
Hey, Fred, we've got a couple of the questions. What's up, Scotty? You all right?
My mother is finally watching after months and months of watching everyone else's mother watch. Mother has finally decided she's got enough faith in me to watch. There you go.
Welcome, Mum. How are you? Oh, my gosh. She's so cute.
I stopped getting cryptic messages from my parents on WhatsApp about various things she's watched. Because all she does, she'll send me a text with a reference to something she watched that we did 2 weeks ago. And so I'm just like, I don't understand what these messages are about. So I think she stopped watching.
Fred, on the weekend, my mum and my grandmother and my father were all at, well, my stepfather were all at the party. And the poor boys, when they started walking in the door, my mum's like running up to them going, oh my God, hello, Scotty. Hello, Andrew. Hello, Matt.
She was the first one I recognized. I was just like, I know you. It's like, you know, we don't know each other. I was just like, I know you.
Yeah. And then a couple of other like friends from non-hospo were like, oh, you're the one on the videos. So like that's how they knew them all. But mum had she was fangirling over the boys. So.
Very good.
I have a question for you that we sometimes ask on, which caused some shit before. Drink whiskey for the rest of your life or all other spirits?
That's really tough. I know that I'm supposed to say that I would drink whiskey for the rest of my life.
Sorry, Scotty, you pulled that up so quick. Well done, mate.
Yeah,
I'm
I was like,
so impressed. I was like...
But, you know, to be honest, you know, I love mezcal. I love rum. I love so many other things. It'd be really hard. It'd be really hard for me to choose. I think it's a tough question, but I think that yeah.
Guns to your head.
Yeah, I'm gonna go everything else just because it's so. The world of spirits is so huge, and there's so much still to be explored. I just tried like a crazy. Aguardiente de caña from Oaxaca in Mexico. So like Mexican agave, like Mexican cachaça, which just like absolutely blew my mind. And there's still so much out there. So yeah, I'm going to go everything else.
And you can get away with it because you can buy any bottle of amazing whiskey, add 3 drops of New Mex Spirit or anything you like into it and go, well, it's not whiskey anymore. So it doesn't matter.
Righto.
No,
Okay.
I think that's the correct answer, I think, Fred. And while we are descending into madness as we tick over to the hour mark, I'm just going to bring up a bit of a comment that Ali, who we mentioned before, is working at the distillery, posted a little while ago that I think really sums up the people that you worked with, Fred, but also the people that worked around you in the industry. Which is grateful to have had the chance to work with you. You've been a great mentor and will be missed. And I think that's true. And you will be missed to Sullivans Cove, but we're not losing you for the world of spirits and whiskey. And I'll tell you what, if you go down to your local pub and Fred Siggins is pulling your schooner for you, that's a pretty good experience at the pub. So, Fred, it's been a pleasure to work with you and with all the stuff that we've worked on. And I think that goes for everyone, not just here and not watching, but everyone involved in whiskey and Australian whiskey.
Thank you very much, mate. Much more to come, I'm sure. I don't think that the world of Aussie spirits or the world of whiskey is rid of me just yet. Not entirely sure what's going to happen next, but I'm sure you'll still see me kicking around.
That makes me very happy that you're not leaving, because you've been a wonderful example of what a brand manager should be, especially for quite a pivotal time with Australian whiskey. So thank you for myself for being such a wonderful guidance and role model. So thank you.
Thanks, mate. That means heaps. Cheers.
Wonderful. All right. Shall we go watch some State of Origin, kids?
It is, yes. We will let everyone get back to watching State of Origin. I mean, you don't need to. It's going to be an absolute landslide by the mighty New South Wales Blues. But for those Queenslanders who like punishment, you can watch it as well if you want.
And Scotty, should we exchange our mum's details, because they're chatting here?
I don't think we need to. I think they already have.
They're like, welcome. Thanks, Vicky. Like, yeah, there's it's a mum thing.
And just before we let everyone go, from something that flashed up a little bit earlier, Milne, who's Puddles?
I don't know. Who knows?
Wasn't directed at me. Don't think it was directed at Fred.
That's not to me.
Alex didn't recognise us. Only one other person who could be this.
No, it's a nickname of mine, of my sister-in-law, who has already posted on Instagram saying, when you straight up embarrass your brother-in-law on live TV.
Fantastic.
It was a name that we were joking about, terrible names to name your children, for the sake of not embarrassing people who've named their children these names. I won't name the other ones, but we decided to name all these different names and landed on Puddles at one point and decided that that wasn't appropriate for a child. And so they decided between my wife and her two sisters that would be my name instead.
Puddles.
Yeah,
We'll keep that one.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that to our attention. And you're welcome back in the chat anytime. But yeah, another comment here that's summing up Fred, you bloody legend from Kathleen, that sums it up as well. But look, Fred, thank you very much for taking the time out when you can be out in drinking in bars and in parks and things now. So we appreciate you staying indoors for one more hour for us when you didn't need to. And we will hopefully see you down in Melbourne and up in Sydney and all those beautiful things when we're allowed to do it.
Well, the borders are open, so I'm allowed to visit you guys again finally.
And I am on my way next week. So I'll be coming to you live next week from the farm on Wednesday night. I'm going back home to help with harvest. And I'll be in Melbourne town on the 29th.
All right.
And a big shout out to all our friends in South Australia who have suddenly had to lock down and close, especially Crybaby, who had hoped that they could be classed as a childcare centre, but apparently not.
Oh, that's brilliant.
I mean, it's daddy daycare, but I don't think they didn't get that one over the line, unfortunately.
All right.
Excellent. Look, thank you everyone for joining us, for your questions and saying g'day. Yes, next week, I don't think we've got exactly what we're going to do. Unfortunately, Matt Bailey will be back next week, which is a little bit of a shame, but that's all right. But yeah, Alex on a farm, which is always exciting. That makes up for Matt Bailey being back, so that's going to be good.
If we shifted it a little bit earlier, I might be able to get outside, but at this time of night, it will be dark down there. But I could actually come live to you from a barley field if you wanted to.
Yeah, and we might actually go a little bit earlier because at 8 o'clock, I'm jumping into Ard de Merkin launch party live with Alex Bruce and that sort of stuff. So
that'd be amazing.
Yeah, maybe if anyone wants to join in that, we can sort that out as well. So maybe next week a little bit earlier, but that's all we know so far. Thank you, Fred. Thank you, Cara, for releasing Fred for this hour as well. I know he's probably got stuff to do.
Thank you very much. Yes. Cheers, guys. Have a great week, and thank you so much, Fred.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers, gang. Thank you very much.
Can you believe that? Can you?